Today we're going to explore the tragic tale of Joseph Stalin. Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin was the dictator of the country of the USSR. In my opinion, I see him as the most influential dictator of all time. Part 1 will be this video. I'm going to explore his childhood. Let's get started. Joseph Stalin was born on December 18th of 1879 in the country of Georgia. Georgia was then part of Russia. Stalin's Georgian name was Nosib Dusashvili. As a young man, Stalin became interested in communism. Communists believed that all citizens should share their country's wealth, depending on their abilities and needs. In 1903, the Communists of Russia split into two groups, Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. Stalin joined the Bolsheviks. Their leader was Vladimir Lenin. And fun fact, the Mensheviks was the majority, even though that meant minority. In the Bolshevik it meant majority, but majority was not minority. Stalin's father, Vissarion, was a cobbler with his own business in Gori. He was fluent in Russian, Georgian, Armenian, and Turkish. In 1872, he married Stalin's mother, the 17-year-old Kitavan Galidze, a deeply religious peasant serf. Remember, at this time, many people were serfs. The couple's first two sons died shortly after birth, causing Vissarion to develop a drinking problem. When Joseph Stalin was born with a number of birth defects, including 2 conjoined toes, Vissarion's alcoholism may have been to blame. Obviously, that doesn't, just because that happened to him, doesn't mean we can excuse him from the stuff he did. He killed 20 million people alone. He just let them all starve. It was his own people. He didn't care. But we'll say this contributed to a lot of why he was like this. He had a very violent childhood. By the time Stalin was born in 1878, both of his parents had deep-seated plans for how he should mature. So basically, his mother was Orthodox Christian, I believe, and wanted him to grow up to be religious. The father wanted him to grow up as a cobbler. Now, obviously, he doesn't do those, but he would go through a lot of abuse. Like, one example was when Stalin's father repeatedly returned to abduct him from school, forcing him to do a shoe factory. And basically, if he didn't, it would go pretty bloody. His childhood was punctuated by violence and misfortune. His face deeply scarred by smallpox at the age of 7, and later in life, photographs altered the height of disfigurement. The beatings of father also became so severe, sometimes had blood in his urine. Imagine that. This is 10 years old. He's bleeding urine. His urine's blood. His left arm became disfigured through illness, fighting, or abuse, causing 2 inches shorter than his right. Finally, at 12 years, Stalin was seriously injured for the coalition with a horse-drawn carriage, requiring months of rehabilitation. Yeah, really terrible. But everything would change when he meets one special man, Lenin. Now, Lenin was a controversial figure, but he was able to inspire many and would acquire a large group of people. One of them was Stalin, and then he joins the Bolsheviks. In 1917, there would be another Bolshevik revolution where they would finally win, and soon Stalin would now have to compete to see if he could become the next dictator, as Lenin's health was digressing. We'll see next time on part 2 of what would happen. Now we'll see his rise to power and his hungry dictatorship. Hello. Today we're going to talk about part 2 of Joseph Stalin. Now we're going to see his rise to power. This is going to be really interesting. But before we go fully into it, I think Joseph Stalin would agree that you need to subscribe to the channel and watch more. I'm going to start trying to make more history content, and yeah, I'm ready to start. Let's go! Throughout the early 1900s, Joseph Stalin, which, fun fact when we get later on, Stalin means steel. was wildly popular in the Bolshevik Party and constantly attended conferences. But none of these were in Russia, because the Bolsheviks were banned by the Russian Tsar, who was the king, basically. So they can't really do anything. And I believe at the time, Lenin was also banned to Switzerland until the Germans allowed him back in once World War I was starting. The conference in Finland would introduce Stalin to Lenin, and they would agree a lot on communist ideas. They would also rob a lot of places and fund all the money in for the party. Not only that, but they were very dangerous. This group was an out of place, an extremist party. So behind closed doors, Stalin bid his time and gradually made his way up the party's hierarchy. What he did was just get things done. It's simple as that. That's how you become powerful. You just gotta know what you're doing and get things done. Stalin would take a lot of control over the military side of the Bolshevik Party and would do a lot of heists. One famous one being in 1907. Stalin would do even worse, even to the point of kidnapping people, which would get him arrested by the authorities. But, funny enough, how he would escape was him dressing up as a woman, and damn, I guess that's how you escape Russian prison. He headed to St. Petersburg in June 1909. Now, St. Petersburg, though, was the capital of Russia. I'm pretty sure later on, once they get in power, they moved it to Moscow. In February of 1912, Lenin, who is then exiled in Switzerland, appointed him to serve as a member of the Central Committee in the Bolshevik Party. He would use the Russian media to make the Bolsheviks look much better, and would even change his name to the most popular thing we all know, Stalin. So from around the time that he joined the Bolsheviks up to around 1913, Stalin found himself sent to prison for a total of 7 times. Wow, he has a big criminal record. He was also exiled a number of times in Siberia, which is the very eastern side of Russia. The manner in which he always went in and out of prison and exile. So now let's go into the February and October revolutions, where we kind of laid off. Basically, in February, saw the Russian Empire fall into the hands of middle-class liberals. Protest after protests had forced Tsar Nicholas II to leave his throne. Both Stalin and Lenin saw this as an opportunity for the taking. The two men had just been elected to the executive committee of a very influential council of workers in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. Yeah, they renamed it, I'm pretty sure. The Bolsheviks organized a series of protests demanding the resignation of the provisional government, which is the liberals. Senior figures of the party such as Stalin, Lenin, and Leon Trotsky geared themselves up to seize power from the provisional government. In October 1917, a branch group of Bolsheviks led by Stalin, Leon Trotsky, and Vladimir Lenin successfully conducted a coup and forced the provisional government to resign. Together, the trio laid down the foundation of the Soviet Union, which it was in 1917. Lenin was selected as the leader of the country and the party, of course. His right-hand man, Trotsky, and Stalin. They moved the government from Petrograd to Moscow in March 1918, because remember, the Germans, this is like World War I, so they're being invaded and they're worried, you know? They moved the government from Petrograd to Moscow. The Kremlin became home to Stalin, Trotsky, and Lenin. Stalin was appointed Secretary General of the Central Committee. He also served as the chairman of the government council people's commissars, or like the Soviets. In his role, he helped draft a constitution for the Soviet Federation Socialist Republic. Stalin frequently supported a security service that committed several heinous crimes and atrocities. Their acts were infamously referred to as the Red Terror. So basically, he would support groups that would force communism upon innocents, and they were scared. That's why it's called Red Terror. With Lenin's health declining, which he dies in 1924, Stalin placed himself in a favorable position to become Lenin's heir. I almost said chair. So, how he was doing it when he eventually died. He would build all kinds of, like, he would build a giant memorial for Lenin, and then would even do one of the first edits, like first types of photoshops. And because of that, he made it look like he was closer to Lenin way more. And because of that, Stalin successfully outmuscled and outmaneuvered his opponents to take complete control of the Communist Party. His first action was to eliminate his opponents one by one. With the help of allies, Stalin expelled Trotsky out of the Soviet Union. Trotsky was the most dangerous for him, because he's the closest that could probably take him out. And even Lenin was worried about Stalin. He constantly was saying how he was worried that he's gonna destroy the party and make it the kind of dictatorship we all know today. And what happens? Later, he would betray his allies, and they would suffer worse fate than Trotsky did at the hands of Stalin. Both men were believed to have been killed by Stalin. Stalin would grow and become really, really powerful. But it kind of goes to show, never trust him. Stalin is pure evil. He's a manipulative man. The reason is that when you're a dictator, anyone can betray you. You don't go soft, you have to be tough. Stalin, now he's in power. But what's gonna be next is he's gonna see another man with a mustache fight him. Hello, what is up everybody? New episode for the Stalin series. I'm gonna start doing more history videos and I'm gonna start expanding more. Also, you can check out my new Instagram I got. Let's start the new episode. So this is gonna be about what was it like in the 1930s. This is about how Stalin was able to hold himself as the dictator without, any like crazy rebellions or enough to create giant civil wars, just like the White versus Red Army. So let's go over it. Stalin, a Georgian, surprisingly turned to the great Russian nationalism to strengthen the Soviet regime. During the 1930s and 40s, he promoted certain aspects of Russian history. Some Russian national and cultural heroes and the Russian language, and he held the Russians up as the elder brother for the non-Slavs to emulate. Industrialization developed first and foremost in Russia. So one of the interesting things that was happening was he was going as far into industrialization as possible. He knew that this would help the economy and boost everything. So throughout these years, it's been extremely difficult because when you had just a farmer type of economy, and which it's a big misconception that Russia's just ice, maybe today, but back then it had a lot of lands that were really good, like Ukraine and Poland. So the land there was very useful, and they would use it as farmland. Now he was trying to industrialize the nation and advance it even farther. So that was Stalin's plan. Even when he lost Poland, it still was very heavily a farming kind of economy that he had to change. But this would create a very negative effect. Throughout the 30s, he would probably have got millions killed. The reason why is as he was changing the economy, he had to go as fast as possible. When you do it slowly, over time, it doesn't hit as much. It's kind of slow, but it'll lead to the least amount of casualties, basically. But if you were to do it as quick as possible, there's no time for anyone to adjust to what happens. So what happened was, everyone just started dying off. People are dying because not enough food from the farming economy. We can learn a lot from Mao and communist China. What they did was they tried to go and industrialize the nation as fast as possible. The problem they did was that they made a lot of dumb policies that did not back up the farming. And because of that, it led to, I believe, 30 million dead. 30 to 40 million. So Stalin industrializes the nation. And he also tries to get history in his head. Like, he tries to control history. That's his strategy there, right? So throughout the 30s, remember, this is the Great Depression era. When America got hit, everyone was having a tough time. His goal was to try and make it as fast as possible because he saw an opportunity. Think about it. You see all your enemies kind of weakened. Now you can see yourself as the greater kind of system, which is his idea of communism that he tries to spread. But throughout this time, a lot of bad stuff would be happening. Over time, he would get a lot of people against him just due to how he was becoming an industrial power, right? Stalin becomes extremely strong, right? And then he gets to the point where in the 30s, we see the rise of someone else with a mustache, right? Hitler himself. As time goes on, they team up, right? And now, what happens is Stalin needs to do something else. His land isn't just going to be that alone to create his insane power. He wants to become the world power. He needs to beat Germany. And that's what part 4 is going to be about. Stalin versus Hitler. The Great Battle. This is a bit of some context to what was going on. One more thing, this one's a little bit more serious. I would just leave it to the end. He also did a lot of killings. It was very sad, but he would put a lot of people in labor camps and they would work till they were dead. It was millions. I'm pretty sure around almost 10 million were in these labor camps and they would work till they were dead, which was called gulags. Millions had died. It was dark times for the nation, and Stalin was a dictator. He literally would kill anyone who didn't listen to him. An evil man, and very torturous towards his people. Hello, everybody. Today, I'm excited to talk about probably what I've been waiting for months on end. Operation Barbarossa, or as everyone knows, the invasion of Russia. Now, Stalin, he thought he knew what he was doing. He thought he was it was pretty narcissistic, but after these losses, it would hurt him mentally, and he would go through a lot of enormous stress, which is one of the contributing factors to his early death. But what happened would be enormous. This is the largest human invasion in history. I'm gonna break down what happened right after another factor that we're gonna go over real quick. Another invasion they did was the USSR liked to push around other neighbors. In 1920, they invaded Poland, they failed. In 1938, there was the Winter War. They kind of also failed. They were able to take a bit of land, but I would say it's not really a success. They didn't join communism until after Hitler was defeated. So, now we have the largest invasion ever. Let's start this. Now is the time for the invasion. Many of Hitler's generals disagreed and thought this was a bad idea, because this would not only be super costly, but also possibly lead to the fall of everything they've been working on. They just didn't believe they could take on the USSR. Hitler, though, was very, very overconfident and very arrogant. He thought he could be able to beat them, to beat the Russians. Who knew that he would get so close? The invasion would start as this plan. How it went was they expected that they get all their forces through with their ally Romania and Finland. They both come in, they take Leningrad, they take Ukraine, they take the Baltics, right? And then after taking all that, they would be able to push up full on to Moscow with a full-on siege, and they would use the power of Blitzkrieg. They would go as fast as possible. Once doing that, they'll be able to make huge encirclements as they're going. Capture Moscow while capturing millions of Russians, and then that would put the end to them, and that would give them the win of all that land and win against the USSR. But unfortunately, things didn't go right. For starters, Finland and Romania weren't really the strongest, so their allies weren't able to push as far as they could have. Luckily, Hitler had and his Nazi army was very powerful. They were able to push through the middle and try to hit the north as much as possible. That was their main priority when they attacked the northern area. Now, even when they got so close to Moscow, it just wasn't enough. Soon they would be being pushed back. And the reason why they were pushed back was the unfortunate reason for them, winter. Winter. This is a huge example. There are numerous examples of invading Russia. Many tried this, and they've all failed. The reason why? The winter. Napoleon failed. The King of Sweden failed. They all failed. Now Hitler is trying to do the impossible. Survive the winter, without anything else of comfort. The only kind of attack that's been so close to beating Russia probably was 1917 with the World War I. That was the closest. The reason why was they weren't doing blitzkrieg. Well, they tried to, but the thing was it was slow, and they couldn't really get deep into the winter areas, and they were a little more cautious. Hitler was the opposite. He tried to go as fast as possible, all full strength at it, and because of that, he led all of his men in the ice. It was freezing, it was cold, and soon they all started to die out. Stalin would take this as an opportunity. At first, he didn't think, Hitler would never invade us. But the thing was, Hitler hated communism. That's kind of one of the reasons why he even started this all. So, he comes in, right? But Stalin was finally able to get his act together, get his army, and push Hitler back, and even go towards Berlin. Now, there's a lot more detail, there's a lot more stuff in depth to everything, but basically that's how I break it down. Stalin was able to get things back together. He took out his stress, and he was able to successfully get them to, stop Hitler. He was able to push Hitler back. But unfortunately, 20 million Russian lives were lost. Now, you might think this is all Hitler's fault. Stalin's strategy was no better. He would basically just send men out. It was a war of attrition, and they would all just die. Many being captured, tortured to death. He even let his own son die. Stalin didn't really care about the Russian lives. He just wanted to win this war. He was freaking out. He didn't think he could do anything. I would say his generals did the work, not really him. He even murdered some of the good generals, which is weird. But that's kind of what happened. Stalin did let his generals have a little more strength later on. They were able to push back. Hitler, the reason why he lost was he wouldn't listen. He was being pushed back, so his next strategy was try and take the south, steal the oil. That also failed due to the decisive battle that probably changed the entire world itself. The siege of Stalingrad, named after Stalin himself. But due to the loss, with his divisions having too much spread out, they're too spread out, right? They were all taken out, and they couldn't make any maneuvers or encirclements. And because of that, they lost the entire war. Stalin wins and makes a new deal that leads to the Cold War. Stalin has now created a giant communist power. Now he's up against the United States. Capitalism versus communism. Hello, everybody. Today, we're gonna finish up with the last episode of the Stalin series. We're gonna talk about the last years of Stalin's reign. After the war, Stalin imposed on Eastern Europe a new kind of colonial control based on native communist regimes. Nominally independent, but in fact subservient to himself. He thus increased the number of his subjects by about 100 million. But in 1948, the defection of Yugoslavia from the Soviet camp struck a severe blow to the world communism as Stalin dominated. To prevent other client states from following Tito's examples, Stalin instigated local show trials manipulated like those in the Great Purge of the 1930s in Russia, in which satellite communist leaders confessed to Titoism, many being executed. The guy basically would be able to leave and make Yugoslavia probably the farthest from the Soviet Union or the communist states that were being puppeted. And this kind of scared Stalin a bit. But anyways, back to it. As the Eastern Bloc is now laid out, it creates a huge tension arising, and which leads to the president of America, making a new thing where he would basically, I believe it was a law he passed that basically would contain communism. That was the priority they had. They wanted to make sure that communism wouldn't be able to grow any more. This angered Joseph Stalin severely. He was a very, very ruthless dictator, and from then on he would just be ruling over. He would be very harsh and very cruel towards everyone. Fortunately, he wouldn't last long. On March 5th, 1953, at age 74, he would suffer a stroke. He could have been able to get better, but what happened was, he would always torture the doctors, and he was all so cruel and awful that the doctors were scared to help him. So many basically just left him to die like that. He kind of deserved it. He was an awful person, but the effects he did on the world cannot be denied. He had changed the world forever and led to a very terrible era, and probably one of the most enormous wars to ever happen, known as the Cold War. Communism versus capitalism. And yeah, that's kind of the end of the series. This is kind of short. I'll add just a bit more commentary. I just feel like the legacy of Stalin's just enormous, what he did throughout those years. It's just crazy how he was able to become a dictator for that long, become so powerful. Kind of goes to show how one person could just be so powerful, and how it affects everyone else around him. He was able to control 250 million people, many that were innocent and just wanted to be free. This is kind of the end of the series. This wasn't really much for me to talk about, but yeah, hope you enjoyed this, everybody. This is the end of the Stalin series. I'm happy that we ended off at somewhere pretty nice. What happens after. He's not really, he's not good, He's not remembered as good, except in Russia. That's probably the only one that sees him more of a hero. But we find out the truth, and we know how awful he truly is. And let's hope communism never touches our nation ever again. I'll see you later.